microphone.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is John Gray, and I'm the president of Historic Frankfort. And as you know, we have a lecture series every year, and this is our final lecture of the evening. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Cable 10 for filming this for us, and also would like to thank the Farmers Bank for making this their community room available to us as they have all year. Tonight, we're privileged to have three of the most outstanding citizens of Frankfort. Unfortunately, none of them are candidates for City Commission.
I approve this message.
But as you know, Gene Burch and Nicky Hughes and Russ have worked very hard on collecting photographs and publishing historic images of Frankfort, which is now on sale to the general public. And they're going to share with us some of the photographs that they collected. And I think Nicky is also going to talk some about the new Frankfort History Museum. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our guest.
Thank you, John. I would like to really thank Historic Frankfort Incorporated, and especially John Gray, for really making all this come about. Last summer, as you recall, through the efforts of Historic Frankfort, we had 3 sessions where the public was invited to come to the Kentucky Coffee Tree Cafe and bring in images, photographs from Frankfort's yesteryears. And they came, and they came, and they came, and they came, and they're still coming. Even tonight, some folks brought some photographs for us as well. Through those images, we have created this first book. Another book has already been completed. It's yet to be kind of polished, and it'll be out sometime next year. Don't think about it right now. Let's just think about the present book. And these gentlemen you see in the picture here, the fellow on the left in the blue shirt is Jeff Jeffers. His grandfather made a lot of the images that are in our collection now, as well as in the book. Next to him is Bob Lanham, who was on the committee. He and his wife, Sally Clay Lanham, they actually laid out the book and designed it for us. The next man is Richard Taylor, for Richard's books, and professor at Kentucky State University and former poet, Kentucky Poet Laureate. He, of course, has written the introduction to our book. Then there's Dr. Gene Burch, the photo dentist. We don't know if he's a dentist photographer or a photographer dentist. He also has calendars that are, how many years now, Gene?
Since 1992.
1992, you do the math. Then Mr. Nicky Hughes there with the beard in the background. He'll be with us in just a moment. He's the curator of historic sites for the city of Frankfort. And then myself, and then that's Bill Rogers, who of course many of you folks know for his photography work and his father's work for many, many years here in the capital city. We found in these collections a lot of different photographers over the years, the Matterns and the Cusicks and the Greters and the George Hills, and then others that were involved with some beautiful pictures as well. We will talk about some of those in our effort tonight. 75% of the sales of these books, Historic Images of Frankfort, go to the Capital City Museum. The Capital City Museum is located at 325 Ann Street, and we'll let Nicky Hughes, the curator of historic sites, share with you the information now about the Capital City Museum.
Thank you, Mr. Hutter. As Russ was saying, when we asked people for photographs, there was a flood of photographs came out of the attics and closets and back rooms and out from under the dressers in Frankfort, and we were encouraged by that. And I got to thinking, if people will turn out their photographs in such volume, I wonder if they would also produce three-dimensional objects, historical artifacts with the same enthusiasm. So we began talking up the possibility of a museum dedicated to the history of the city of Frankfort. About that time, we received a very generous donation. Mr. Rodney Ratliff gave us the building that is now housing the museum. The biggest part of the building was part of the Capitol Hotel, which city government built in the 1850s, in part to make sure that the legislature stayed here, to make sure that the General Assembly had a nice place to stay when they were in Frankfort. Most of it burned down in 1917, but Mr. Ratliff owned what remains, and then an adjoining brick building, which had been a drugstore and lots of other things since. When he made that donation to the city of that property, that pretty much made the project possible. We then asked the citizens of Frankfort again if they were willing to donate material, this time for the museum. We wanted to test that theory, that people would be generous with objects as well as images, and by golly, they have been. Thanks to the generosity of the folks in this town, on the evening of November the 18th, candlelight tour night at 6 o'clock, we will cut the ribbon on the Capital City Museum. From that point on, Frankfort will have its own history museum. We are acquiring all sorts of things for it. We still have some things we would like to have, and we strongly suspect that there are still things hiding out there that we know nothing about that we'd love to have if people would bring them by and show them to us. So it's an invitation for you to bring us your stuff. The people of Frankfort have done a superb job of providing photographic images. Now we're looking for objects. And now we're looking for you. When we cut that ribbon on the evening of November the 18th, at 10 o'clock the next morning, I'm going to unlock that door. And between 10 and 4, every day thereafter, except Sundays, I hope, if we get to do it like I want to, somebody's going to have to be there to meet and greet people. We are now enthusiastically enlisting volunteers to help us keep the doors of the museum open. And if you can spare us a few hours every week, we'd be delighted to sign you up. Give me or Mr. Hatter a call, 696-0607. We're going to have a training session for volunteers on the evening of Wednesday, November the 10th. And if folks are interested in helping us out, we'd like to hear from you before then, so we can get everybody off to a good start. We are getting some fascinating things. You're going to be, I think, proud of this new, it is a small museum, but there's some interesting things in it. Today we acquired the portraits of Mr. and Mrs. John Haley, who Mr. Haley built half the historic structures in Frankfort, I think. We have one of the cedar logs out of the original water system that brought water from Cove Spring. If you look at the Capitol Dome itself, you can still barely see it out through there. We have the original copper ball that was placed on the top of the dome when it was first built before 1910, and it was taken off during the recent renovation. We like to say that that's, for many decades, was as high as you could go in state government. This is a tough crowd. So, and that's the kind of thing we're getting. Lots of things. We had one very generous donor who collected all things that say Frankfort on them. So he has a wonderful collection of things made and marketed and sold here in Frankfort, and we'll have all those items. Military objects, people have just been incredibly generous so far, and we encourage folks to keep doing that. And we encourage you to come by on the evening of November the 18th, and in the days following, we're going to have a whole new attraction for you to come and see. Thank you much.
Thank you, Nicky Hughes. We appreciate that. Now, since we've had the commercial, I guess we can get on with the show. The reason that you all came was to see some of these photographs. When we got some of these photographs, they really were in poor condition. A lot of folks found photographs that were actually thrown away in the trash, or had gone through floods, or had gone through other problems and tough times up in the attic or in storage. And so we thought with our program tonight, we would show you the original photo that we had, and then we would show you what it took to make it into the book, so to speak. And so Gene will be making comments along the way. As you recognize this spot, this is Bridge Street, long before the white light and the YMCA. This is back before the 1890s, when the Iron Bridge was built in 1893, opened in 94. This is your covered bridge here. And the Centennial Parade, this was in 1886. Gene, comments?
I wanted to leave. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I don't have the microphone and I don't have the booming voice that Mr. Hadley has, so you'll all have to forgive me. I did want to explain along the way some of the techniques. It seems like when we started this project a year ago in June, I would bet the number of families or the number of individuals that have digital cameras probably have doubled. It seems like it's been almost anybody that comes up to me now, like, I've got this new digital camera, I don't know what am I going to do with it. And so what I want to do is give people a little bit of an idea of what you can do with an image editing program, which is what we use on the images in this book. And then also give you a little bit of background about how we came about with the type of image that we did. I'm going to open up Photoshop now just for a second, just to show you how we came about. Let me get rid of this here. We printed this book not in grayscale. This image originally, we decided that these images were just too good and they deserved something better. Now, as many of you know, a color book is a 4-color process, 4 different inks. Cyan, yellow, magenta, and black produce a color book. We decided to print these images in duotone. And to do that, what you do is you go and change the mode to duotone. And as you can see, you use 2 different inks. One of them is black, and then we picked out this sort of an orangish yellow, I guess you would call it. And what that did was give the image sort of sepia, or as Jeff Jeffers likes to call it, a selenium kind of look, which if you see in the book, it gives it a richer kind of feel. So that's one of the things that we did, and I wanted to explain that to begin with, and then we can go on to the next image. So we got the before, and then there's the after, and I'm going to go in a little bit more detail later on about how we go about cleaning these up and making them look a little bit better.
It's amazing the photography that we had in the older days. It's absolutely incredible that you can blow up some of these pictures and see the detail as much as you can. This is the Kentucky River Mills employees in 1884, the hemp factory that was out where Jim's Seafood Restaurant is today, across from Lock 4, the best restaurant by a dam site, I believe they say. During the Depression of 1873, the collapse of the hemp market occurred and wiped out our Franklin County hemp processing industry, accounted for the loss of some 330 jobs. Actually, the hemp mills went on until the 1950s. But this is the employees taken in 1884. There's how it looks in the book.
Now, as you can see, that the biggest problem with this image was the scratch down the middle. So what I want to do is open that up, and then I'll show you a little bit about how a program like Photoshop, and actually there's all kinds of programs now that everybody's got digital cameras. You can get many of these image editing programs are under $100, like Microsoft Picture It. I think Corel Paint is one. Adobe Photoshop Element is a small version of Adobe Photoshop. We used Adobe Photoshop in this project, and thank goodness, because we were able to do, it has a few more features that the others don't. But just to give you an idea, like, of course, the hard part of this one would be to get rid of the big streak going down the middle. And one of the tools that all these programs have is a clone stamp, it's called. And it's a thing where you can see where my cursor is there. All you have to do is set a spot where you want to copy from, and then you copy to. So it's just a matter of, like a paintbrush, and you can go in and fix all kinds of things. And when you get down to like faces, like this guy here, it's always good to go in and zoom in, maybe not quite that much. But then you can go in and actually make your brush quite a bit smaller on the stamp. And for instance, you could just take his one eye and then make another eye over there. And then of course, an image like this might take several hours to correct because there's so much detail in all these faces. Things like this right here, where you're going to correct the wall, you can do that real fast by just going up and down. So the clone stamp tool is a real benefit, and almost all these programs have it. So I'll quit on that one, and we'll go on to the next one, Russ.
When I mentioned it was a hemp factory, it was not to smoke or anything of that nature. It was for binder twine, for carpet backing, and the Kentucky River Mills, of which Paul Sawyer's father was one of the owners in its early days. It was one of the top mills in the country during its heyday. But times changed, and necessary needs changed. The United States purchased most of its hemp products from Russia. This is another shot of the covered bridge. This one, you actually get to see a trolley on the inside, and you see there's a divider right down the middle of the bridge there. So those would go on the right, and those that were incoming would be on the left. And of course, all those fabulous details that you see are absolutely incredible. You see the trolley lines where they go ways. It's just absolutely fascinating to see that. Above the bridge where the entrance there is are a bunch of signs. Just like we have billboards today when you drive around town, those were billboards on the bridge. Talked about pharmaceutical places, drugstores, furniture stores, and things of that nature. This is the Brislin building. It's located 100 West Main today on the northwest corner of Main and High Street. This is around 1910 or so. It was built in 1868. And at one time, the Kentucky Arts Commission worked from this building. Jerry Brislin was a dry goods merchant in the 1880s. He was primarily a plumber and had a lot of plumbing goods. His location for his business for many years was on Main Street, on down the corner toward where the old Fitzgerald Drug was located at 229 West Main back in the old days. But this is a building that he owned, and at one time perhaps he had a business there. Note in the corner on your left, that dark spot is where a little bit more where the door is, where the little bend is. Apparently they had an opening there that's not there today.
Bill Rogers donated this photograph, and Bill, through his family, has a collection of various photographers over the years. He's probably got more than he would ever have time to go through, and we really appreciate he and Jeff Jeffers and Jeff's father's donations to this project. It wouldn't have been near as good as it is without them.
This is the Kentucky River frozen. This was back in January the 28th of 1940. And of course you see the iron bridge there, the singing bridge, and you see the YMCA as well. The Y, of course, was built about 1912 for $60,000. And of course it was put together by Leo L. Oberwarth, the architect here in Frankfort, leading architect at the time.
anybody know how many times the river freezes over? I've been here 30 years, and I think I've only seen it once where you could actually walk out on
Yeah.
the river. Is that something infrequent?
You even drove a car out of it.
Is that right?
Whoa.
This is the Owen Moore Saloon on Broadway from the 1920s. Notice that chair there on the left. It's a shoe shine chair. You can see where you can sit in the chair, put your foot up on the props there, and the shoe shine man would do his thing. It's got an umbrella over top, keep the sun off of you, or perhaps the rain, as might be the case. This was located down at 223 Broadway.
Is that Owen Moore?
That's Owen T. Moore,
Yeah, with a
and
mustache?
the guy on the right, I believe, is Owen T. Moore.
This image was donated by the Kentucky Historical Society, and it was from a glass negative, and it's probably an 8x10 glass negative, so you can see all these spots on there. And this was a perfect tool to use the clone stamp. But what I'd like to do is show you also how you can bring out, see how, well, it's not as dull on here as it is, but let me show you the after. It's a big difference, and one of the tools that you can use in these image editing programs is called levels, and let me open up this image. One of the first things that you do when you want to look at your image, once you bring it into the computer, is bring up the histogram that shows you all the various lights and darks in the image. All these graph right here represents all the light areas, and of course this image has a whole lot of light areas, so that represents that. This is all the grays, which is all this in here, and you see there's hardly any blacks. That little bead there is probably all these little black specks. But all you got to do is just bring this little slider in to where it begins to hit the real data in the image, and you can see almost immediately that it becomes quite a bit better just by making that one little correction. So that's levels, and we use levels on almost every picture.
If you'll zoom in on that a little bit, you'll see that there is a long belt. This is steam engine harvesting here. That belt goes all the way over to the left, all the way on. You need to go a little bit, yeah, right there. See the steam engine? That belt ran all the way across. And it's interesting to note they're using the steam engines, and we got some mules, wagons, another wagon in the background full.
Is that
Harvest
hemp
time.
Is that hemp or tobacco?
I'm not sure what that could be. Hay, I'm not really sure what it is that they're threshing there. This is from about 1900, about 100 years ago. This is our Frankfort Fire Department. This was when it was located on Main Street, and it was there for quite some time. I know a lot of you folks remember 307 West Main Street was the fire department building, right across from the McClure building, down from the Capitol Annex at this point in time. This building was built in 1868, and it was built by John Haley. Nicky mentioned John Haley. This was taken about 1890, and I could go on and on and on about our fire department because we've got a lot of information about this building. But it's still standing. On top of it, I will mention this, was a tower. It had a fire alarm bell in the tower. From the top, of course, you could have a real nice view of the city of Frankfort. A bell was mounted on the top of the firehouse, and it rang the number of strokes signaling the ward in the city, the WARD, in which the alarm was given. So if it was a certain number, that meant it was in Ward 7 or 3 or 4 or wherever. That was how the firemen knew where to go. So that was a few years back. And as you can see, this is a hose wagon here with horses.
If you can notice this image, it has quite a bit of deterioration up in the top, and this one took a little bit more finagling than some of the others. So I'm going to show you real quick, hopefully quick, how to use correct this. A lot of times in an old image, there's places where, see, like all this has been destroyed by some kind of process wherever they kept this photograph. And what I did was use one of these structures here that's in good shape. And all you have to do is you hold down the Alt key and you can just go in, and I'm going to start here. Go in and select this little element that is in good shape. There's a little keystroke called Command J, which makes that a layer. I'm going to bring down the layers palette. This is going to make this going to seem a little bit more complicated, and I hope I'm not going to lose everybody. But actually what I've done is made a little layer here with this window. And I'll turn out the background and see where it is. And then all I got to do is go hit the move tool, and I can move that window over here where one of the bad ones is. But now the perspective is not right because this is, you know, it gets bigger as it goes out. But in Photoshop, there's a really neat trick where you can go in, and I'm going to lower the opacity of that level, that layer down to about 50%. Now you can see the ones underneath showing through. See? So I'm going to put this right on the edge. Then I'm going to go to my transform tool, which means I can then scale this up and out. I can even take these two little corners and I can put it right where I want it to go. And then just, who said wow? Somebody gets a free calendar. I've always wanted that. But then once you get it pretty much placed, then you bring the opacity back up, and then boom, you can sort of fix this. Then you go in and you make a mask and you knock out where that door opens and all that kind of stuff. I won't go take away from Russ's time here to show you that, but then bingo, you got it fixed.
It does open up the idea as this is a beautiful picture now, but it isn't the same picture that it was. So there'll be some folks that would say, I want the power lines, or I want the blurs and the dots and all that mess. But then there's some of us that want to see it this way, almost like it was taken yesterday. This is the prison chair factory in the old Hogue Montgomery Shoe Building that was located on the northwest corner of High and Muro Street across from the Frankfort Penitentiary. This was taken in the 1890s. You can actually see some of the convicts down there in their striped breeches and everything. There's a wagon full of prison chairs and other items. We have several prison chairs that will be in our Capital City Museum. At this particular place, the public could purchase a wide variety of goods manufactured by convicts. Among the many articles for sale were farm implements, tools, iron rods and hooks, drawing and log chains, kitchen and fireplace utensils, bridles and other leather goods, furniture, bits and screws, and a host of other items. They got into trouble because local merchants in town said, this is unfair. These guys make it for nothing, and you all can sell it a lot cheaper. So they had a lot of problems with the local folks here in town. When the Depression hit the shoe company, it failed about 1932, and around 1939, the Barrett Shoe Company took over the assets of Hogue Montgomery and moved it down to Barrett Avenue, 516 Barrett Avenue. Bicycling.
This is one that Bob Rowe donated, and when he brought the image in, we could almost barely see the image. It was amazing. But it was nice that we scanned the whole thing, because Russ appreciated the fact that we could actually see the date that this was taken. Was it 1900?
October the 10th, I think, 1903.
But this is an image where
1893, pardon.
took, I'm going to take the layers back up, and I'm going to show you what you can take. Like if anybody finds old images that are in their attic and you feel like it's too faded, a good thing to do is to go ahead and try to scan it and restore it, because you can do all kinds of stuff. Of course, the first thing we're going to do is just crop this to get rid of the other stuff. And then we go in and check our levels again. Notice how there's no information up here on this white end, on the dark end. So I'm going to take this all the way up, and almost immediately, this looks quite a bit better. But then there's another little trick you can do, and that's using curves. And curves is a different kind of thing that does the same thing levels does. This represents the white, this represents the black, and then the grays in the middle. But then you can sort of make a little S-curve out of this, and that increases the contrast. And bingo, you've got quite a bit. You can go.
Can we hear another wow?
I think they end up,
There you go.
they end up as well with some of the programs you can use. It just says enhance.
Yeah.
And in essence, that's what's happening though.
Exactly. Okay, Russell.
Bicycling was a real fad back in the 1880s, and it really hit the big time in the 1890s. People would ride from Frankfort to Louisville. We have one fellow that drove from Frankfort to Bridgeport in 35 minutes, all the way up the Louisville Road Hill and swell. The heyday of cycling was, as I said, in the 1890s. It was a very popular culture for several years, but then came the automobile, and the bicycle became the bicycle that we know today. This is the Spanish-American War soldier. We think his name is R.D. Wicks. And in L.F. Johnson's History of Franklin County, he lists 96 names of men from Franklin County who served in the Spanish-American War. Not all of them went down south. Most of them were down in Georgia or Alabama. They never made it out because the war ended. We had in Kentuckians that served in the military between 1898 and December 10th of 1898, just for about a 6-month period, 89 Kentuckians were killed or missing in action. The poet and the portrait artist and landscape artist Robert Burns Wilson, when he heard about the men killed on the battleship Maine down at the Havana Harbor, he wrote his famous poem, Remember the Maine. He wrote it in a Frankfort residence, which is still standing on the northeast corner of Clinton and Ann Streets. Congress picked it up from a New York newspaper and made it into the battle hymn of the Spanish-American War. When you're looking at this picture, be sure you enlarge it there, Gene, where the sign is above, and you'll see a man's hand holding that up. Little things that you would never see with the naked eye starts to come out with these pictures. This is a very famous man here in the capital city. On the left is John R. Follis. He's posing in his store, which was located on the corner of Wilkinson and Hill Streets about 1920. Hill Street was right at the foot of Fort Hill. It's where those Riverview Apartments complex on Wilkinson are today. He was king of crawl, a boss who allegedly made his money from bootleg whiskey and gambling, who could swing the entire area behind a political candidate if the price was right. People compared him to Robin Hood, Casanova, Don Juan, and Al Capone. By the age of 50, he was dead, murdered during a confrontation at a gambling joint, August 18th, 1929. We have a copy of the newspaper that was brought in among the things we received for the museum, and the headlines were about like 2 inches high. Follis dead, king of crawl. Jim Wallace with the Kentucky History Center, he defines the bottom area, or crawl, as 50 acres bounded on the west by the Kentucky River, on the south by Broadway and the railroad tracks, on the north by Fort Hill, and on the east by St. Clair Street. This is our prison with Fort Hill in the background. Big barn is located up there on the top on the right. This was taken in the 1930s. The house in the lower photo in the center there, that White House, was the business location of M.G. Sullivan, who was owner of a building supply company listed in the 1930s city directories. He went out of business due to the Depression. A lot of these businesses that we have in these old pictures and images went out of business during the Depression. The sign on the right, on the top of the house over here in the corner, on the corner, right here at the bottom, right there, that says M.G. Sullivan Supply.
This is one of those where you debate whether you should take the power lines out or not. To me, it looked better with the power lines out and blown up a little bit, so you could actually see the structures and you weren't distracted. With the power lines in there, that you kind of, your eye is guided by them instead of by what really is in the image. So I'm sure historians are going to say, shouldn't have done it, but.
How do you feel about it? Would you rather see the original as it was, or do you like these photographs put together like this?
Do you still have the original copy?
Oh, yes, we do, yeah. That's what's in the book. We're trying to make it like it was, we're trying to make it like it was just yesterday rather than 100 years ago.
Well, it ought to make people appreciate, someone with all of the power lines in there from one standpoint, because the planning board has put a lot of them underground and out of sight.
Right.
Being from a Lycoming family in Wisconsin, we'd want to see the wires.
Well, you're getting a chance to see them tonight. This is, of course, the prison towers, about 1935. It once stood at the intersection of High and Miro, adjacent to Holmes Street. The prison was built in 1798. These towers were erected in 1837, and they were modeled after the historic towers of Warwick Castle, one of the showplaces of England. Some historians feel the plans for those towers might have been drawn by Gideon Schrock, Kentucky's first great architect, or as some say, Schrock. He was in Frankfort at the time. He was building the Franklin County Courthouse on St. Clair, so it's possible. 1937 flood put the prison out of business. Then came a movement to raise the towers. To some, the towers were a symbol of cruelty and injustice. Some wanted to leave no tangible evidence of that hellhole that once stood here. Others said the towers were a memorial to the philanthropic spirit of our country that gave birth to the institution, commencing early in the history of the Union. The tower windows and the doors were boarded up, but the vacant rooms in the towers were still used as public toilets and as a dangerous playground for children. It was quite a controversy, but on November 14th, 1950, the century-old prison towers began to come down. The October 1950 grand jury recommended indictment of responsible state officials if nothing was done to remedy these conditions. So Highway Commissioner John A. Keck said, "That was enough to convince me. I certainly don't want to be indicted." Despite protests of history-minded groups that wanted the old towers preserved, by the end of December 1950, the towers were gone.
Question, I do have. You said, I thought that the CRAW, or the prison, was where the big building, which is a highway department, or used to be, right now it's vacant. I thought that's where the CRAW was.
Well, Craw was where I told you, from St. Clair to the river. That area wasn't the bottom. That was not the bottom.
Wasn't part of the CRAW then?
No, it was not. It all starts about where St. Clair is and goes to the river.
Okay.
What does crawl mean?
Crawl was the area there behind the old Capitol and toward the river. That little section we talked about was an area that had ponds in it at one time. Before we became a town, the Kentucky River would overflow into the North Frankfort area and sometimes even go down what we know as Holmes Street today and then join the river again behind where the distillery is. So that property, when the town first began, was pretty much worthless. And Wilkinson, when he came in and founded the town in 1786, he elevated and ditched and got rid of a lot of those, but that seepage and pondage was there. You had a lot of crawfish, so the crawl concept came there. having the prison here in the state prison in Frankfort. A lot of the people that were incarcerated in the prison, their families would move to Frankfort because their loved one was in the jail, in prison. So they would live in low rent housing, many of them just buildings and shacks, but there were a lot of beautiful homes in Crawl too. You don't always hear about the nicer homes, but there were a lot of sections that were very, very nice.
Mark, it's interesting that the people from the Crawl were called crawlbacks. And, you know, my office is where the Crawl used to be. And I still have older patients that come in and say, hey, how you doing, crawlback? To this day. So it still hangs in there.
This is Charles Bridgeford's houseboat, the Nancy B, on the Kentucky River near the south end of Wilkinson Street, around 1913. The photo was taken by Mason Parker, who was a pharmacist with Serafini's and later Fitzgerald's, and also, I believe, with the Gale Drug Store. But like our dentist friend here, he loved taking pictures. So he did a lot of them. He donated this picture to Nettie Glenn. And when he did so, he told her that that boat belonged to Paul Sawyer at one time. Now, we have no proof of it. I've gone through and tried to match this shanty boat up with the paintings of Paul Sawyer. None of them fit. They're different windows, so it's, who knows for sure. The fellows in the picture, that is Gilbert and Murrin Brawner, brothers, with the old 2nd Street School in the background, and the Judge George Collin Drain house over there. That was used later by 2nd Street School for their kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 1st grades until they expanded their building.
Is part of the river frozen over there?
Yes. This is taken from the area. This is before the Capitol Annex was built in the early 1950s. This was taken in 1918 on the 4th of July. And this was when an airplane landed back there, and you can see all sorts of things. There's a Red Cross vehicle here on your left, the big car there with the Red Cross insignia. A lot of bicycles are there, other vehicles around on the hill. This would be up toward Shelby Street. This is the Schweitzer Bridge being rebuilt around 1890 or so. The Kentucky Midland Railway erected a train station there about 1889 out at Schweitzer, where farmers would ship their livestock, tobacco, and wool from the Schweitzer station. The bridge itself was originally built by George Hawkinsmith in 1855. It was 120 feet long, 12 feet wide. It was known as the Kissin' Bridge. A lot of gals and fellas got their first kiss on that bridge. Covered bridges were all over, not just in Kentucky. It was designed to help preserve the bridge by keeping out the rain and the snows and ice and things of that nature. This bridge here in 1999 took a real beating when we had that big flood from that 14 inches of rain that we received, and they had to redo it. And that's what we got today, is the Schweitzer Bridge, still in action. This is the Grand Theater. Back in the days when they had the silent films and they had an orchestra that would play, sometimes you would have an organist play music or a pianist that would play, and sometimes you would have a live music such as this with a band. The Grand Theater. This was where Charlie Morris's auction house is that faces out on Main Street. The screen would be on the Main Street side. This is about 1900, the 1900s for this one.
I believe that screen was not on the Main Street side originally, was
Yes, this was in this part. The other theater was just on the St. Clair side when it was a movie theater too.
it? I remember when the Grand Theater went straight back to St. Clair Street.
Right. But see that,
Here they remodeled, and you went in and you turned and went out toward.
right, well, this part here was there as well, but was not used, just like it is today. This shot here is the fellow with the big high That's Paul, P-A-W, John Thomas Brady. He had a repair shop on St. Clair Street for shoes, and he wound up having, his best interest was music. And he had all kinds of bands, and this is just one of his bands that he was a part of and that he led all over Kentucky. This is Mr. Brady and his shoe shop. This was at 232 St. Clair. Phone number was 376, and you'll see the instruments at the top shelf there in the back. Above one of the instruments is a poster for a band concert at Cove Spring Park, Thursday, August 14th, 1902.
So Russ, Cove Spring was a historic park,
Yes, that was Frankfort's first city park.
but it wasn't, was it not in the same location? So the name, the new Cove Spring?
No, Cove Spring Park is right where it's always been,
Oh, really?
right back in that box canyon.
Okay.
In the 1830s, John J. Crittenden spoke to over 4,000 people in the rain on the 4th of July. But that was where they had a lot of park activities, was out there at Cove Spring Park.
Russ, can I talk about this?
Yes, sir. This is a real fascinating picture.
This image was one of these that took a lot of effort between members of the group. The image was donated by Jeff Jeffers' grandfather, or taken by Jeff Jeffers' grandfather, Walter Jeffers. It was an 8x10 glass negative that obviously had been sitting someplace or had a whole lot of damage to it. And we tried to scan this with our scanner, and the glass was just too big. We only had a slot maybe 3 inches wide. So Bill Rogers, using regular photography techniques, made a contact print where he just set the glass negative down on a piece of paper and shine light on it and made a direct contact print. He made one light and one dark that then we scanned and could bring into the computer, and then cleaned it up quite a bit. I really think this is a wonderful photograph, and it was well worth the time trying to restore it, because you see this guy, he kind of reminds me of one of the monsters in a movie.
Freddy Krueger.
Freddy Krueger kind of guy. You can actually see the bike of this little boy that's climbed up to get a better look at the parade. These two little ladies walking down the street. And I don't know, Russ, do you know what kind of parade this was? Or?
No, I think it's a circus parade. Notice the shadows, too, of the horses right there on the paved street. You see the brick paving and everything. That building on the left, that big stone building there, that's about in the area where Sauer's Office Products, a little bit farther down from that, is where this was located.
You can see part of the Singing Bridge.
There's the Singing Bridge, and you can almost make out some of the Baptist church down there as well. That's an incredible picture. This is a shot from the Jeffers family about 1905. This is over on the Benson Creek Bridge, which was built about 1881. It was serving traffic on State Route 37 until 1958, when the new concrete bridge was built nearby. The city of Frankfort had acquired a new heavy fire engine, and the old bridge was considered unsafe for it, so they had to build a new bridge. This is the famous Whipple Truss Bridge, and of course it's now part of Riverview Park. It's part of the mile-long trail there at Riverview Park. Note the child in the rear is being towed on his sled by the horse team. I think you've got this, yeah, that's right, okay. This is another picture of downtown Frankfort, Broadway in the snow from about 1928. On the immediate left is the block of buildings that preceded today's History Center. The first corner building on the left is the old Merriweather Hotel, later referred to as the Hunt House. You can see the arsenal up there in the middle of the screen. And of course, the depot has a 2-track canopy protected area there from 1928. This is a group of buildings that are gone. You don't see these on Broadway anymore. This was taken in the 1950s. You'll see in the shoe repair spot there is also, to the left of it, is the Dixie Cream Donut Shop. Brewer's Quality Shoe Repair with over 20 years of know-how. Then comes Raymond Moretti's Liquor Dispensary, featuring domestic and imported wines, rum, Erdel's 92 beer, Seagram's Extra Dried Gin, and then you got Bill Stokely's Army Goods. Note the old parking meters.
Now look at the before and after in this photo. This is another one of these nice things you can do with Photoshop. I'm going to open this up just for a second, and we can figure out where it is. We've got it down the line. Photoshop, to me, is one of the best programs that was ever written for a computer. It comes with so many nice little tricks that it takes years. I've been working with it for 10 years, so I finally figured out some of its tricks. But hidden down under this little eyedropper is a thing called the measure tool. And when you've got something that's like a horizon line that's definitely out of kilter, you can go in and take your measure tool and draw a line along what should be level. Then if you go up into image, rotate canvas, and arbitrary, Photoshop figures, well, that's 4.34 degrees off of level. That must be what you're trying to do. So you hit OK, and bingo, it straightens it up. And then all you got to do is then go in and crop it, and then you got a straight picture. Wow. Wow. Is that another wow? There you go, Mark. You did it.
Those buildings today are the parking lot of the Christian Church on Broadway. This is the Buffalo Trace Trestle under construction, taken on March 28, 1885. At the foot of Rouse Avenue today, you can see the remains of this old trestle. Tracks and the trestle are gone today. It was 170 feet off the ground. The Kentucky Midland Railway first used it. It ran from Paris to Frankfort. It was known as the Bourbon Route because its two main customers were two local whiskey distilleries. Beautiful picture. This is the Devil's Hollow Road at the Kentucky River. There used to be a bridge there. There's still a bridge there, but it's not visible like it is in this picture. The old railroad bridge is seen in the distance there. And I just found out today that the Devil's Hollow Quarry started somewhere around 1910. So we're learning things constantly as we play with these photographs and dig up information.
Taylor Avenue, then.
This is Taylor Avenue, right. Some people think, some historians think this is where Stephen Frank was killed by the Indians in this area here, and that's where Frank's Ford got its name.
It's where Devil's Hollow got its name, from the Red Devils.
Yes. This is a picture on Home Street, 142 Home Street. This is Henry Gober, who is the guy standing behind him. That's Henry Gober. He was believed, he was considered as one of Frankfort's best grocers. He married a Lukemeyer woman, and then he started the Henry Gober grocery store, where Lukemeyer's was at Lewis and Broadway. Originally it was Gober's. And then as he sold out to his half-brothers, it got into the Lukemeyer family. This is the Lukemeyer dry goods store interior that I mentioned on the southwest corner of Broadway and Lewis Street. Lots of items in there, and you can see how we brought them all out with the magic of this modern day photography. This is the Murray Building on St. Clair. It was built, as you can see up on the top, in the, can you make it out? 1877. Murray built it, and he never used it. He sold it immediately to I. Davis, where I. Davis Menswear Store was for many, many, many years. Back in the 1990s, it was the home of Pegasus Players, Frankfort's community theater, also known as Theater Off Broadway. Here, an annual average of 7 productions was presented for the public. Everything from Neil Simon to Henrik Ibsen brought laughter and tears to local theater goers. Its demise came about due to the heavy expense of operating a full-time facility. Building owner William Crumbo worked very positively with the group, but heating, air conditioning, insurance, rental fees far exceeded the amount taken in by the sale of tickets.
This isn't one of these that you can argue about. Do you like this one or do you like that one? It's with lines, without lines. We'll argue about that later.
This view here is looking from Buttermere Hill in an eastward direction during the flood of 1913. This flood crested at 38 feet here in Frankfort. Chuck Bogart, our resident train specialist, believes the building on the lower left there was some kind of toll bridge house. There's clearly a walkway on the left of the train bridge to accommodate pedestrians from Bell Point and Buttermere Hill into downtown Frankfort. There was no highway bridge. This is a train bridge here. There was no highway bridge for vehicles at this time. This was taken in the about 1913, as we said. It was converted into a highway bridge when the new locomotive bridge was opened in 1929.
This is one of these where I'm going to show you another little Photoshop trick for anybody that is interested in this stuff. And maybe you all are, somebody at home, but this one is probably a pretty cool trick because you see a lot of images like this sometimes that are, I'll show you, it is obviously much darker, well not much, but it's darker on this side of this line. It must have been creased at one time, and you see how it's lighter over here? Well, if you go in and you select this part here pretty carefully where the line is, and then I'm going to just select this side that's lighter. Then if you go into your layers and you add a layer, I'm going to add a curves adjustment. And if you notice, this little layer mask came up here. If you can see where I am, Photoshop figured out, well, you selected this area, so that must be the area you want to affect, and you don't want to affect this other area, so it's going to leave it black. Now watch, I can make this lighter, I can make it darker, but if you go with your eye and you say, okay, when is it going to match that other side? Well, that looks pretty good right there. You say, okay, now you do have that little streak that goes down the middle, but what we're going to do is flatten this image, what it means is just combine that layers. Then you can just go use your clone tool and fix that little line real easily, and bingo, you've got it cleaned up pretty fast without having to do a whole lot of knitting stuff. This takes a little bit longer to do here, but you've seen the technique before doing that. So I'm going to just then show you the after. Now in the next image, watch for this house.
Ooh, Ku Klux Klan. This is in the 1920s, about 1924, in that time when Honest Bill from Olive Hill, William Fields, was elected governor of Kentucky. He never made it one of his platforms, but the Republican that was running for office had said he would put African Americans in high positions in state government if he was elected. Well, the Ku Klux Klan on their own did a lot of demonstrating like that to stop this from happening. And that may be or may not be how Honest Bill from Olive Hill got elected. This is right there where the train is, going across to the right there, all the way over would be into Frankfort. And that's, of course, Taylor Avenue there. This is a fabulous picture here. This was taken from what they call Devil's Backbone below Berry Hill off the Louisville Road in the late 1890s. And the description here is absolutely incredible. Over on the left, we'll start with the terraces. And above that is the old Capitol cupola with the annex to the right. And then below the annex is the bell tower from the Frankfort Fire Department. Franklin County Courthouse cupola, you see that. Then the Good Shepherd spire, the post office building built in 1887, the library of today. That big tower you see in the background, not the spire, but it's the J. Miles Milling Company grain elevator over on Ann Street. And then you can see the dome for the Capitol Hotel. It's in the picture. Of course, the Iron Bridge, Jackson Hall up at Kentucky State University. Only then it was called Kentucky Normal and Industrial Institute. The State Arsenal is visible as well over on the right. Frankfort City Schools down here. And this is the drain house again that was used for the lower grades of 2nd Street at one time. Just a marvelous photo. This is a building we think, we've been saying it is the corner of Lewis Street and Main Street. But I've been doing some second thinking, wondering if it might not have been early enough, since the date, I believe, is, I don't have a date, but it's one of our oldest pictures.
Yeah, this was taken from a stereoscopic image. This is what it looked like originally. And
Yeah.
actually, somebody brought this one in originally, and we kept thinking that might be smoke.
Smoke, yeah.
Actually, a tear in this stereoscopic image. And then somebody brought this whole thing in, so we were able to crop this and blow that up to where you could actually see. But
Is that the Presbyterian
Yeah.
church
Yeah.
there?
Mhm.
yeah.
That's what that is.
Then, once you blow it up, it almost looks like where it could be where the St. Clair Mall is, or where the mansion house.
I think it's probably Lewis Street and Main,
I think so.
where Hudson's used to be. This, of course, is Noonan's Grocery Noonan's Grocery in South Frankfort. And that house that you see in the background, it's been removed, raised for the Investors Heritage Life Insurance Company building. We think that was George Salander's house. He ran a saloon and grocery store over on St. Clair, where Kroll Insurance building is today. This was taken in the 1900s, kids playing in the street.
I can remember the Salinger lived on the east side.
Okay, then maybe we don't have the right fella then.
That building actually, instead of being an Investors Heritage, was part of the switching gear
Yeah,
telephone.
right. Then they took it over and built that in there. This is the Gaines Livery Stable on the northwest corner of Clinton and Lewis, about 1900. Bowman Gaines had this, and he saw the handwriting on the walls, automobiles, so he opened the model laundry instead on this very same site down on Clinton Street. Note the signs of the horse on each side of the front of the building. A lot of people couldn't read, but they all knew what a horse looked like when they saw one. Family tales have been handed down to Mike Fleming, who is the grandson of Bowman Gaines, that say one of the conspirators in the Goebel assassination, following the shots that killed Goebel, ran from behind the Capitol and hid upstairs inside the livery stable. But we don't have any proof for that story. This is a very fascinating shot of the way Wilkinson Street used to look many, many years ago. This is an aerial view of Frankfort from Fort Hill looking toward Wilkinson Street about 1930. Note the way Wilkinson once was located farther from Glen Willis as it is today. It gives Glen Willis much more frontage, then winds into the edge of Leestown to its similar route today. You can see Lock 4 across the river behind Glen Willis. Kentucky River Mills are where Jim's Seafood is today. You can see the distillery up on the hill in the back there, and of course Leestown. Glen Willis was built in 1815 by Willis Atwell Lee Jr. And Humphrey Marshall lived in this house, a fellow who wrote the history of Kentucky, the first one. This is the Capitol Shoe Shine store at 234 St. Clair. You'll notice they've misspelled it. It says Sinclair in the photo, 234 Sinclair. This was September 26, 1933. The model laundry calendar on the wall gives us a date of January 1933. However, the National Branch Bank of Kentucky calendar just below shows Tuesday, September 26, 1933. The clock on the wall says 9:15 a.m. Tom Theophanus is in the middle, and Harry Papadimitriopoulos is on the right. And as was so many times in these images, the African American was never identified, so we don't know who that gentleman is. Note the shoe shine chairs there and the foot props lining the wall on the left. John Brady's shoe shop repair was located next door at 232 St. Clair.
Before you leave that one, their main income, and it was missed because I worked here in that shop as a kid, was blocking hats. They cleaned and blocked felt hats. And that's a wooden mold that he has his arm on right there. And and then they sold a lot of cigars.
And that was here when I came to town in 1965.
Yeah,
Buddy Demerson, Theo,
He
he donated the photo to us.
He and his wife both immigrated from Greece, and his name was Demeropoulos.
Changed it, didn't he? This is another one of our county shots of threshing out in the fields. You can see quite a bit when we blow it up like that. House in the background. This was taken, I think, in the 1930s. The George T. Stagg Distillery Company with the Kentucky River. The plant, of course, is now Buffalo Trace, as we know it today, but that's a beautiful shot. This is Ann Street, where the parking lot and the additions to the First Christian Church have all taken over all the way down to the corner. This is what was there. The far right, if you went far enough, would be the building where we had Putt's Restaurant years ago. On the far left is Nicole Garage. He was a Chrysler Plymouth dealership, or Nickel, as some people referred to him. This O.N. Smith and Company was a wholesale grocery store, did a lot of business. And, it says we have fresh meat Saturday, hams and roast, our own baby beef from Kentucky Valley Poultry Farm. Proprietors are Smith and Trumbo, raising their own fresh pork and poultry. Then there's a little restaurant squeezed in there too between those two trucks. That is the Nicholas Covata, C-O-V-A-T-T-A restaurant. And then on the far right is Emil Sorg's harness shop. The long distance phone number, by the way, if you care to know, for O.N. Smith and Company was 336. His new phone number was 193. This is a Kentucky State Boy Scout Camperall bivouac that occurred in 1932 in the month of June. This was taken from the new Capitol building. That's Shelby Street going up the hill, and you can see we've got a lot more houses today that are there than was then. This was in the 1932.
What's that house up there?
That's Point Breeze. That was where Frankfort educator B.B. Sayre lived, and I believe Marion Ryder lived there in more recent times. This is Melody Park. Many of you remember the garden and terrace Buddha statue built by the Kentucky River, or rather by the Kentucky River, built by Louis Horwitz, who was a barrel cooper. He made those staves that went around the barrels and made the whiskey barrels for a lot of whiskey companies. And after the 37 flood devastated Frankfort, he decided he would begin his own park, and he named it for his daughter, but he also named it for his red, white, and blue houseboat that he called Melody. after his daughter. It was 9 acres, swimming, boating, picnicking. Nothing was ever sold there. Nobody minded bringing their own lunch, though. They had concerts and movies, the 2 Chinese pagodas, stone pillars. Most amazing thing about it all is that everything was free to the public. One source said it went out in the 1940s due to flooding. Another source said 1950s. I wasn't here, so I don't know. But it cost him about $60,000 to build. And the first flood that hit him in 1939 did $15,000 damage to his park. So he had to wind up giving up to nature. They had 350 light posts that illuminated Melody Park.
Where was that?
That was located at, as you're going out the old Lawrenceburg Road, Todd Street, past and over toward the river. And when you make that turn in the bend, there's a new marker that's been placed there, and it's over the side of the hill there. And some of it's still left. I'm planning to taking Cable 10 down when we get a little farther into the winter, when more of the trees lose their leaves, and film what's left, because some of that stuff is still there. The old Buddha is, I think his head's gone, but he's not in too good a shape. Stay tuned for that show.
The entrance was actually off of,
Fowler?
yeah, back in that area.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this photo, though, is we hated to make this one black and white because it was such a beautiful color shot, but this was actually a transparency that Jeff Jeffers' grandfather must have taken maybe in the 40s, which had to be pretty rare. So we did have to convert that to black and white. And I was going to go into a little technique about how to do that, but we're running late. So if anybody wants to know that, you can ask me a question later. And that gets us to the end of the show. And I wanted to make a little plug for the Frankfort Heritage Press's website. If you want to see a little bit more about this, or if you actually want to contact Russ or Nicky and let them know anything about any kind of artifact or image you might have, you just go and click on this little contact button and you'll be able to get them. The really neat thing about this is actually a little slideshow where there's music from the late 1800s and early 1900s that plays right in here. And if you would like to contact me, you could go to my website, geneburch.com, and hit that contact button. And if you want to tell me you don't like the power lines or you do like the power lines or anything like that, just fire right on. And then I'd like to make a plug for Bob and Sally Lanham for the great job they did in designing the book, and for Sally and all these little drawings that she did that really accent our book and make it really something that stands out. So I'd like to thank them also.
Thank you all.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and especially thank Gene and Russ, and Nicky's already left, but thank them for all the hard work that they did on this book. It's really a remarkable book, and I hope if you don't have a copy that you'll plan to get maybe several copies. Because as Gene or Russ or Nicky said initially, that the majority of the proceeds are going to go to the Frankfort Local History Museum, which is really going to be an asset. So again, thank you very much for coming, and that's our last lecture of the year. So have a good rest of the year.
Thanks, John.
Must have most of this down by heart.
Actually,
What are your thoughts about this program? Cable 10 would like to hear your comments and suggestions regarding this and other Cable 10 programming. Please call our viewer comment line at 352-9100. You will have 1 minute to leave your message. You can also send email messages to cable10@fewpb.com.